How's it going? I am an instructor over in the West Coast Remote Immersive program. I used to teach for the Central Time program, and I live in Boulder, Colorado. And my name is Jared Lewis. So that's my introduction. Now, I would love for our panelists to introduce themselves. Let's see. I'll say what you should say first. How about your name, your location, the company you're working at, as well as the role and how long you've been there, what cohort you were in at Codesmith, and what you were doing before Codesmith. I know that's a lot of stuff. So here, I'll paste it in the meeting chat to help you out. And let's go in the order of Pei, Jacob, and then Tim. So Pei, if you want to start us off.
All right, sure. Yeah, thanks, Jared. All right, so my name is Pei. I am based in New York City. I just moved here 2 months ago. So when I was doing Codesmith, I was still on the East Coast, but I was over in Boston area. And I am at an edtech company called Dreambox Learning, but we were actually just acquired by another company called Discovery Education. So going through that transition right now. And I've been there since July, so I guess it's been about 5 months at this point. And my cohort for Codesmith was Petrie 8 with Jacob. So we were in the same cohort together. We graduated in March. So it's been almost 9 months since then. And before Codesmith, I was a high school science teacher. So also with Jacob in Tutor Gang. So that's me.
Amazing. Jacob?
Hey everyone, thank you for being here. My name is Jacob Cole. I'm in Atlanta, Georgia. I am currently I'm a solutions engineer at Algolia, which is a late stage startup specializing in search and discovery. My cohort also Petrie 8. We would always refer to it as Petrie Great because it's just the greatest cohort. And what I was doing before Codesmith, also an educator. I was a middle school social studies teacher and had a couple of years working in school leadership and higher ed as well.
That's so cool. Thank you for the introduction, Jacob. And last, Tim. Tim, were you an instructor? An educator as well?
I was not. No, I actually worked for a robotics software company before this. But on the implementation side of things, I would program robots every now and then, but it was pretty high level stuff. Yeah, so my name is Tim. Nice to meet everyone. I'm located in the DC area, and the company that I work for is called Density, and they manufacture sensors. They're radar sensors that they put in commercial spaces, office spaces that count people. And I work as a senior full stack software engineer, developing some of the internal tools that we use to figure out for our deployment planners to figure out where to put those sensors. Yeah, and the cohort that I was in was ECRE 41. I've been working at Density for about a month and a week now. My cohort graduated at the tail end of August. And yeah, I think I went out of order there, but
All right, I got you.
that made sense.
Appreciate that introduction, Tim. So let's first talk about a couple of questions about the Immersive program. So I'd love to hear from each of you. What spurred your transition into software engineering, and why did you decide to apply to Codesmith? So Pei, do you want to start us off again?
Sure. Yeah, so I think, there's a few different reasons for me personally. I think the main thing was I'd been teaching for a few years at that point, and while I do really love teaching, I sort of was coming to realize that it wasn't necessarily what I was best suited for. And so I started thinking about, what are some of the other, paths that I could maybe go down. And I had the very unoriginal idea of following in my other parents' footsteps. So a little bit of background for me is my mom is also a teacher and my dad is a software engineer. So I went down mom's path first, and then I was like, well, what if I tried dad's thing? And so I went ahead and tried out some like online, self-study coding, including CSX, which is part of the reason why I chose Codesmith, because that was like one that really clicked for me. And I was like, wow, this is actually a lot of fun. I could really see myself trying this out. And I actually heard from my brother, who is also a software engineer, that his company was hiring bootcamp grads. And I was like, okay, so this is actually something that I could do. Like, this is not out of the realm of possibility. Because before then, I hadn't really realized, I guess, how feasible boot camps were in terms of, jumpstarting your career. And so I was like, all right, let me just try it out. And I found Codesmith had a part-time program, and it had, obviously the best reviews out of all the boot camps that I was looking at. And I tried it out, I interviewed, and then I was like, this all feels really great. And so now here I am.
That's amazing. Yes, I feel like I hear often that people often go to Codesmith after hearing the experience of somebody else who went through, right? Because it's so hard to understand how feasible it is, right? Until you actually hear from somebody else. So love to hear that you had that context going in, Pei. Jacob, you want to take this for us?
Yeah, without echoing all of the same things that Pei said, which I absolutely could, especially about education. It's the most rewarding career, but it has its challenges to be sure. I had a background, I guess, while I was still in college, working in web development. It was all self-taught, just helping small businesses get something on the internet. And after a number of years, a career in education, I had always thought, well, what if I had pursued that track? And so there's this whole other life lived that I didn't have a chance to do. And, mid-pandemic, as I'm sure a lot of us were thinking, I was reevaluating choices and decided it would always gnaw at me if I did not pursue software. And so similar on research, the one name kept coming up. And so I, got on CSX. It was very gratifying. I mean, doing self-taught is not always super gratifying, right? It's between you and you. And then just getting those little green checks was super gratifying. So signed up for, a couple of free workshops and actually went through CS prep. And when I had a chance to see just the community and the type of instruction that would hopefully be ahead of me, that sealed the decision. And yeah, and so interviewed, of course, and enrolled in Petrie 8.
Amazing. I love CS prep. It's such a great way to like get in the community. Hope that was a part of your experience. I went through CS prep and yeah, it's amazing. Tim, what about you? What spurred your transition and why Codesmith?
Yeah. So I actually graduated college with a finance degree. And out of college, when I started working for the robotics company initially, I worked as a project manager. And I kind of just gravitated towards our robot lab and taught myself and got involved in some of the robot programming for some of our projects. And then I eventually became a robot programming engineer, which then escalated. And then eventually I kind of stumbled into web development, and I loved it. And I was trying to create my own projects. And then I kind of took a step back and realized what I was doing was not the right way of doing things. And I told myself, okay, I need to learn how to do this the right way. And I had a friend that actually went through Codesmith as well. And I heard that he found a lot of success going through it. So then I enrolled into CS Prep as well, and loved the style. It's the community aspect is what really drew me in. And then from there, I applied to be in the Immersive, enrolled, and it was awesome. And it filled in all the gaps that I was trying to figure out on my own. So it's like the world of web development is so massive. There's just so much that you need to know. And yeah, Codesmith really helped kind of helping me see the forest from the trees. So yep.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tim. Now, my next question is, what is a highlight from your immersive experience? And also, what was something that really challenged you? Do any of you want to go first, or I'm going to call on you?
I can go first.
Go for it, Tim.
I'm sure we'll probably get into this a little bit later. Like one of the biggest things about the Codesmith Immersive is something called your OSP. You might be seeing that acronym thrown around. Basically what that is it's an open source project, and it allows people that are in the immersive program to contribute to the open source community and develop or iterate on an open source tool. And that undertaking is intense. It's which is very eye-opening. It kind of like puts you in the shoes of like a real web developer that actually is contributing something real to the software community. But with that, presents a lot of challenges for a lot of people. I think for everyone on my team, it was our first time actually working on a huge undertaking together. And probably the biggest challenge about that is, you're actually working with hard deadlines now. You need to delegate tasks out. You don't control the entire process from end to end. You kind of have to figure out how to contribute things as a team and kind of like stay in your silo a little bit, and then be able to like, build something up that actually works. And just seeing that whole process, as challenging as it was, is equally rewarding. So yeah, I'm sure we'll talk more about it, but yeah, I would say that was probably the most.
Yeah, the OSP is so great, and we'll definitely I have more questions for y'all about that. But in the meantime, Pei, would you like to add, what was a highlight as well as something that really challenged you?
Yeah. Definitely totally agree with Tim, but I'll contribute some different ones. I think for me, a sort of overarching highlight was definitely like honestly the people that I met doing Codesmith. Like, Jacob's already talked about it, but we were very proud of our cohort, and part of it was just a sense of community that we had. We were in the part-time program, but we did still see each other almost every single day. And just knowing that there are other people going through this, and we're all coming from like different backgrounds and different experiences, and yet we're all still able to connect over this like shared, goal that we have coming into the program. It just created like such a amazing and supportive sense of community that like really, I think, was the only reason really all of us were able to get through it all the way to the end. Because if we had been doing it on our own, then it would have been a sort of impossible marathon, because the Petrie program is 9 months long. So that's 9 months of grinding as well. And I think pretty much all of us had a full-time job at the same time. So that was sort of like the highlight of having that community in order to kind of overcome that particular challenge. But for me, in terms of challenges, like a more specific one from my background, because I was coming from education, and that was kind of like the only career experience that I ever had. Those of you who are familiar with education know that's quite different than trying to make your way in industry. And so actually when we got to the hiring portion of the immersive, it was honestly very difficult for me to sort of wrap my head around like what it would take to make it like in job interviews, even just like the whole LinkedIn thing. Like I had never needed to make a LinkedIn before that. So it was a lot of onboarding, just like the job application process and everything that comes with it that I had never had to deal with before. So that was definitely a challenge. But Codesmith hiring portion was part of the reason why I chose this bootcamp. So there was lots of support, like individual support, that helped me get through that. But I was definitely very kind of nervous about that aspect. So that was something that I did consider quite a bit of a challenge in the program.
And here you are working in industry as an engineer.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yep. We made it in the end.
What about you, Jacob?
First of all, Pei is so modest. Pei was one of the first in our cohort to get an offer. So of course she wouldn't lead with that information, but clearly she overcame those challenges very well. And also is stealing my answers every time. Absolutely the people. So as far as highlights go, and that, to be clear, that's absolutely everyone, from instructors to fellows to fellow students in the cohort. And this speaks to the same thing as challenges. There's so much engineering talent in that cohort, and so you see what other people are capable of doing. You aspire to that. It keeps you moving forward. And also the highlights. I mean, sometimes they're carrying you, and sometimes you're carrying somebody else, and we all drag each other across the finish line. And so it's a challenge seeing people that are so technically proficient or present so well, or all these other traits that go into this whole experience. So that can, be a personal challenge to see that, but that's also absolutely the highlight. And I think we would all say in the end, like we couldn't have done it without each other.
What a sweet message. Absolutely, Jacob. Let's talk about the job search a little bit, right? I'm sure it's helpful for everybody here to hear about y'all's experiences. So, the tech space has been quite turbulent lately. I'm curious to hear, what was your job search experience like after Codesmith? And how did the things that you learned in the immersive, as well as the hiring program, right, and those resources you mentioned, Pei, how did that help you out along the way? Jacob, would you like to go first this time?
No, but I will. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, so yeah, the job search for me, it was a little bit delayed. We graduated in March. I needed to finish teaching the school year, contract, don't want to violate that, of course. So finished teaching in May, and then starting at the beginning of June, started searching full time over the summer. That is a perk of being a teacher, certainly, like having the summer off. And so my job search was full time June and July, and I in late August managed to land my current role. And that was super exciting. It was a lot of hours. But I will say, while there's a lot of competition, there's also a ton of opportunity. There was always traction. There were always, a call, an email, something to keep moving forward with. And, that was always motivating. It was just, let's separate me from the job search and let's just keep going. It is not dissimilar to what you get kind of conditioned to do in Codesmith. Last week was last week. This week is this week. Keep moving forward. And even though that wasn't part of the hiring portion, yeah, so maybe I'm not stealing anybody else's answers. Haha. Not part of the hiring portion, but that ability to have sort of, a very short memory made it that much easier to, keep up those applications, keep interviewing, keep prepping. So yeah, that was the job search for me.
Amazing. Hey, Tim.
I can go. Yeah, so the job search for me was a little unusual. Mine was short, and your mileage may vary. There's a lot of people in my cohort that, that spent a little more time, some that spent a little less. Density had a lot of overlap with my previous experience. And so I spent a lot of time just researching them, and being able to reach out in a very effective way. So they were like one of 5 companies I applied to. And it's not necessarily recommended to take the first company that you interview with, but they just had everything that I was looking for. So it made the process relatively easy. But the industry definitely is very turbulent. It's very ebb and flow. So you never know what kind of market you're gonna enter in, like on a month-to-month basis. But yeah, some of the resources that were super helpful for me where Codesmith does a lot of they focus a lot of time on preparing you for the job search, and part of that was you type up your resume, you build your resume through the cohort. So if you don't have any technical background, you'll get a lot of experience, real world experience to put in your resume that is very relevant to the industry, and they have a lot of resources that help you to kind of fine tune and have your resume look really good, as well as they go over a lot of talking points. And something that I found especially helpful was there's some, after you graduate, there's a lot of resources after that help you through that process, even when you're done with your cohort. And part of that was salary negotiation, and also application message help that was incredibly helpful for me. Yeah, so there's they cover everything, so everything's good there.
All right.
Hey.
So I think might have a slightly different experience than Tim and Jacob, because I actually, when I graduated, I stayed on with Codesmith as a fellow. So sort of like a teaching assistant, for those of you who are not super familiar with the Codesmith terminology. But I stayed on for an extra 3 months. And I was really happy to do so because, like I said, I was a teacher and I felt like I had gotten so much out of Codesmith, and especially the fellows that had instructed me, that I did want to stay on and give back. But the huge plus actually of being a fellow is you get a lot more kind of one-on-one support from Codesmith in terms of job search. Like I was able to chat directly every week with our instructors who had actual industry experience. And then they would, they would take a look at our resume or even just encourage us, give us advice. So that was sort of like an extension of the great hiring support that, like Tim was mentioning, that Codesmith gives you. So that was really helpful. And I was also pretty lucky. I graduated in March and I got my offer in May, and I didn't have to go through really that many interviews. I applied to more than 5 companies, but I actually accepted the first offer that I did get from Dreambox because it was right up my alley, ed tech. It was more front end focused, which is what I wanted, although now I am full stack. And so in terms of, I guess, the process while I was doing it, so I guess a little bit more background, being a fellow is even more of a time commitment than the regular part-time program. Instead of 3 hours a day, it is like a 6-hour a day commitment. And I was still working. School wasn't out for me until June, actually. And so that actually ended up being like an additional challenge, was just time management. But at the same time, it was quite flexible. I was able to apply to jobs and like write up cover letters while doing my fellowship or whatever they call it. And I just wanted to add on, like, part of that hiring support that we got was like, you get not just resume support, but also like cover letter workshops. Like they really, like Codesmith, like even up until Will, who is the CEO, like they'll come and tell you like, what's the best way to like strike that balance between casual and still, professional when you're communicating with people on LinkedIn or writing a cover letter. And that was really helpful for us who didn't really have any experience with this industry, because every industry has like a different kind of preferred way of communicating. And, I'm coming from education where we tend to be a little bit more formal. And then so that was really helpful, even like small details like that, like how to present yourself in a way that, shows that you are part of this industry. You're not just like a wannabe. And so I think, I do count myself pretty lucky. But at the same time, like Jacob was saying, there's traction, and then it's all about just chasing that traction down and making the most of it. So that was kind of my overall experience with that addition of actually being a fellow at the same time. And that was something I could put on my resume. So I don't know if anyone here is considering becoming a fellow, but I'd recommend it.
Yes, fellowship is amazing. I was a fellow at one point as well. So good. So good. It was so amazing that I actually had an offer to work for Amazon, and I had an offer to keep instructing at Codesmith. And I was like, Codesmith, baby, I love what we're doing. All right, but it's not about me, it's about y'all. So Jacob, you already gave your answer for this one, right? We started off. Okay, very good. Let's move on to that open source product then that Tim brought up earlier, right? In your senior portion, each of you worked with your fellow residents as a team to build out an open source product. So I'd love to hear, what did you build? And in what ways did that OSP experience prepare you for your current role?
I can go again.
Yeah.
So my team, and I think the teams are about 5 people. I'm not sure if Petrie's different, but it's about 5 people. We built Harmonode. So if any of you guys are in like the CSX Slack channels and you see people spam like these tools with a bunch of emotes around them, those are people's OSPs. So there are people going through the cohort and they're trying to promote their OSPs. And yeah, it's an API contract tool that uses abstract syntax trees to display the routes between the front end components and the back end endpoints in real time. And yeah, I mean, it was a really fun thing to work with everybody. I'd say the one thing, I kind of touched on a lot of it previously, but just to kind of like reiterate, the thing that probably is best about the OSP that helps prepare you for a job in the real world is just delegating the tasks and also working on deadlines. And then it's very common if you're working in an industry that a lot of people are going to have their hands in the code base, and a lot of people are going to make changes. And there's a certain workflow that you have to get used to in order for those changes to get updated. If you guys have heard of GitHub, that's common in the industry for version control. And just using GitHub in the proper way within a team setting in order for people to make the contributions to the code base synchronously and not have to worry about, anything breaking. And so just going through the OSP and kind of going through those steps really help prepare you for that kind of workflow. So yeah, I think I've covered everything that's on my mind about OSP, but pass it on to the next person.
Great things, Tim. Pei, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I totally 100% agree, and I'll add my own experience as well. But just first of all, like my open source project, and yeah, we worked also in teams of 4 and 5. I had 4 people on my team. We built a VS Code extension that was basically like a Postman clone. So it's kind of interesting. It was like a combination of working with something that was kind of very obscure, which is the VS Code extension API, and then something that's like almost like back to the basics, because we did most of the tooling in like with Bash scripts. So it was a fun, like kind of either end of the spectrum. We managed to fit a little bit of a React front end in as well. But I totally agree. Like for me, honestly, it wasn't really so much of like the actual tech that we were working with, although that was obviously useful to learn how to like read documentation and bash scripting. I think every engineer should at least have some familiarity with that. But the teamwork, like learning how to adopt what my manager now calls a Scrum-ish sort of um, methodology, because those are things that like I found actually to be the most important in onboarding to my current role was like that workflow, right? Like when you're on a team and it could be a smaller team with like 3 devs or a larger team with 10 or whatever, having everyone be on the same page about like how are we delegating the work, like how are we estimating like the level of effort for things, how are we prioritizing, like we didn't have like a product manager when we were doing OSP, but someone had to take that role of like, okay, well, like what do we focus on first, and things like that. That really built the foundation for me to come into my current role and not be like completely gobsmacked by things like Jira and whatnot. And so for me, that was really what was so valuable about OSP, was that was the first time that we really had to like do something like that for a longer period of time versus the smaller projects that we start off with in Codesmith that are, really more about like getting the fundamentals of actually like building something from scratch. So I totally agree with Tim that that was like really the biggest thing I got out of OSP. Although I think the tech itself, of course, is very interesting, like intellectually. But in terms of, I guess, career preparedness, I would say it's really more about like that workflow. Those like almost like logistics, which sounds boring, but it's so essential.
Yes, so essential. Love to hear that y'all had similar takeaways. What about you, Jacob?
Yeah, so my group created Cafe, which is an Apache Kafka visualizer and manager. And Apache Kafka is a message broker that receives messages and stores them until they are consumed by another application. It has a huge throughput of like 2 trillion messages per second. Just absolutely crazy. There are like few Fortune 100 companies that are not using it in some capacity. And so to take on something like that I had not heard of a week before we started OSP was really exciting. Maybe like hear echoes in other OSPs that came before us, but not having any idea, what it was. And the challenge that I think prepared me, most to take on my current role and, just, I don't know, have engineering confidence was the layering of new technologies. It's one thing to take on a single technology at a time. When you're getting like to you 3 brand new technologies to speak to each other effectively and do what you want them to do, it's sort of like an exponential growth and challenge and learning. And because there's not just like one article out there for you that will answer that question, so you're combining documentation from multiple sources to try and put together an answer. And so yeah, I think it was that combination of brand new technologies that was most exciting and most challenging, and also prepared me most for the job.
Yes, I love to hear all those answers. I was in a meeting with Will Sentence just recently where he was talking about how at Codesmith, like he really thinks that what we're doing is building capacities more so than like building knowledge. And I feel like all 3 of your answers really highlighted that, right? Like building the capacities to work collaboratively in teams, to like use Bash, even though you probably haven't used it before, to layer all those new technologies. So, so great to hear those answers. Y'all have already kind of touched on this, but let's dive into it a little bit further. What technical and soft skills do you believe are essential for success in the role that you're in now, right? And how did Codesmith have an impact on those skills? Jacob, do you want to keep going for us?
Sure. Yeah, so I mean, something that you can't spend an hour in a Codesmith session without hearing is empathy. And I can't help but go back to that, because empathy is at the core of hearing what a challenge is, hearing what somebody else is dealing with, and then being able to translate that into something actionable. And so, yeah, the ability to, perceive what somebody else is struggling with, whether that's a challenge, on the job or a technical challenge, how frustrating that must be for you to deal with this. Let's find a solution. Yeah, I would say that has been most helpful, but also coming from an education background where, that is kind of table stakes for, working with young people, is like, let's be empathetic to their situations. Like simultaneously learning how to also be able to speak technically. And it's communication all around, whether it is technical or it is personal. And yeah, I got a lot of experience in both at Codesmith. And so yeah, not the most concise answer, but that's me.
A good answer, a good answer. What about you, Tim?
Yeah, yeah. So with my role at Density, my job is really heavily reliant on cross-functional communication. So the tools that we develop are used directly by Density employees, their internal tools. And so I often discuss, the features that need to be added, and we do a lot of demonstrations for them as well as we're developing the tools. We have like a demonstration once every 2 weeks, where we show what we're working on, and being able to communicate with them, someone who's not coding, they're actually using the tools, is just so important, and something that Codesmith really, really helps you with, because as you're learning, how to code together, you find yourself in a situation where you have to explain a lot of things. People are explaining things to you. Technical communication is such a huge thing where, you're going through your code and you're explaining exactly how things work. And really flexing that muscle and being able to develop that skill allows you to speak with people, at least in my case, speak with people that aren't familiar with coding, exactly what's going on. And also being able to understand from their point of view what they'd like to see. So it kind of goes both ways. Yeah, I think that's the main one. So I'll pass it on.
Amazing. Yeah, anything to add, Pei?
Yeah, I mean, I think Jacob and Tim kind of touched on those soft skills. So I'll add, I guess, some of the technical side, which I feel like I've seen in my time so far. I think being a quick learner has really served me in my role. I was hired to work in like languages and frameworks that I had never touched before. And so being able to like read and also absorb documentation, even documentation, which is just like going into the Slack, like the work Slack, and like looking up whatever it is that I need to figure out, because chances are someone else has had that same problem. That sort of thing, I think, is like one of those like technical-ish skills that definitely Codesmith does focus on as well. Like kind of how to help yourself become like, an expert in whatever you need to be. But at the same time, also knowing when to ask for help. And so I work fully remotely. And so, there's no like popping into the office next door and asking a quick question. There's like a little bit more of an effort involved in pinging a senior engineer and being like, hey, like, I've never done this in Java before because I literally just started working in Java 5 months ago. Do you mind maybe like taking 30 minutes to walk me through what this is? And not feeling like that's contributing to like that whole imposter syndrome, because that's very normal for engineers of any level to ask for help for someone who, from someone who's done it way longer. So I think those are some of the things that I felt like I've had to really lean into in order to feel successful at my role. And that's definitely something that Codesmith also really emphasizes, I think.
Yes, that's so good. I hear from a lot of people that it's a struggle. I mean, also experiencing this personally, it's a struggle to know when and how to ask for help. And yeah, we have systems in place at Codesmith to help you develop those skills. Help desk. Amazing. All right, let's talk about the kind of things that you're working on right now in your jobs. So can you share details about current projects that you're working on, what they're solving, and your role in them?
I'll start this time. So yeah, so like I said, I'm at an ed tech company. My team, or like my value stream as we call it, which encompasses multiple teams, we work on the reporting dashboard, which is educator facing. So we have student facing products that are sort of like educational games, and we collect data on how the students are doing, and then we send it to the reporting dashboard so that teachers can actually see, where are students struggling, how to help them. So we have lots of different reports, like lots of different metrics. So that's like the general product that I'm working on. And it's really awesome as a former educator to see these tools available for educators to, to kind of make their time a little bit easier in the classroom, right? To make their time more effective. When you've got a classroom of 20 plus students, and anything helps. So that's the general thing that we're working on. I was originally hired as a front end engineer, but I quickly was transitioned into a full stack role. So I work actually mostly on the back end now, developing our server, which is written in Java, actually. So that is not something that is taught at Codesmith. So that was something I had to really onboard. And then our front end we have multiple different front end frameworks, but primarily in my value stream, we're using Angular and then a actually deprecated web components framework. Like it's in maintenance mode and is no longer being developed. So that's quite interesting to work with, something that is literally not being developed anymore because documentation is pretty sparse. So that's been its own challenge. But the Java stuff is great. You you never think that you're going to pick up a language like that, but I think I've realized that's something that's actually quite normal for engineers. And yeah, so I think that's kind of, I don't know if I answered all that part of the question. Yeah, that's what I'm working on.
Amazing. Jacob, Tim, anything to add?
Yeah, so at my company, there's like three main repositories or applications that I work on. One of them is just like our API, which is, where all our applications are routed through. But I work mostly in the applications that are deployment planners, which are the people that go out and install our sensors in the commercial space. I work on the tools that allow them to, it's kind of like an editor where, it's an application where they can choose the sensors that they want to place on a floor plan, and then it shows them, like the radius that it covers, and then they're able to figure out, okay, if we put it in this room, it's going to cover this radius and so on. That's one of the tools. Another one is a point cloud tool. So it's like a 3D generated scene where people are able to see the exact dimensions of a room to figure out, oh, can we place a sensor here or not? They're actually two separate applications right now, but like I think we'll have to combine it eventually. So that's going to be a very big undertaking. Yeah, and the technology that we use is kind of all over the map because all the different applications are different. So it's JavaScript, TypeScript. We do Django on the back end, which is like a Python framework. And then we use Postgres as a database with Redis, which is like a caching database. And then like, there's a lot of different applications in the company as well that use Java as well. Hopefully I don't have to touch it anytime soon. And also Rust, which is like a low level memory efficient language. But yeah, I'm staying in my silo right now with TypeScript and JavaScript, and but I'm sure I'll touch them eventually.
That's so cool that you're working on those types of products. In my old life, I used to be a mechanical engineer. We'd have people come in and do 3D scans. The fact that you're working on that kind of technology is like amazing to me. Jacob, what about you?
Yeah, to speak broadly about what Algolia does, the company I work for. So Algolia is a search and discovery platform, and also a search engine, right? So Algolia is actually based on volume, the second largest search engine in the world behind Google. So we power 1.8 trillion searches a year. We have 17,000 customers, and for most of them, we power their e-commerce experience. So if you think about the kind of search experience you get through Google or Amazon, search as you type, search suggestions, and then even down to product recommendations based on what's been purchased, that sort of thing. So Algolia is a search and discovery platform. And as a solutions engineer, I help prospective customers evaluate their tech stack fit with Algolia. That can mean the use of our API clients to index data to Algolia, front end development. So there's some front end engineering there. We've got libraries for every major front end. Libraries for every major front end library to support the development of UI for our customers. And so, at that level, there's a lot of technical conversations and solutioning, and even perhaps helping them see how they can transform their data to index it to Algolia. And the easiest ways to implement a front end that'll maximize results for their customers.
Right. Yes, like Pei said, thumbs up, thumbs up. I'm curious, Caitlin, do we have, in terms of timing, we have 15 minutes left. Do we have questions that we should save time for at this point?
Yeah, I was gonna say, because we're coming up to time, I want to make sure we have a little bit of time for Q&A. So we can definitely move into Q&A, and if people are more quiet, we can continue with our questions. Yeah, so if anyone has questions, feel free to use the raise hand feature. If you haven't done that on Zoom before. Oh, there you go, Dante, Jin, amazing, fantastic, perfect. I'll hand it back to you, Jared, to go for it.
All right, yeah, so let's take a little Q&A break. Dante.
All right, so I don't have a specific question for specific individuals. Just hopefully all three of you guys could answer this. But I guess I'm more interested in like the psychology behind of you guys' journey through Codesmith. And if you guys had to say, from the outside looking in, surface level perspective, what do you think are how did Codesmith change you guys' idea of like mastering something, of mastery in general? And what was the counterintuitive to you? Like just the nature of like roadblocks and things like that, like mental blocks, and then getting through those, just not that specifically, but just to give you an example, just overall, like the learning experience and then self-improvement. I guess like what have you guys taken from Codesmith?
Sure, I can go first. I would say, and hopefully I remember every part of your question. If I don't, go ahead and chime in, and I can hopefully fill in. But I would say like the one thing that Codesmith that I really took away from it is, like if any of you guys are self-teaching right now, it's a very sort of like lonely sort of feeling, and you're not really, you may feel like you're not really sure where you're at in the process. Like, are you learning the right things? Are you focusing your attention on the right thing? But once I got into Codesmith, like all of that started to like clear away, and I started to understand like where my focus needed to be. And the one thing that I really was able to take away is like you can count on other people. Like you can learn a lot from the people around you, and they're a really good resource and really good you know it's a really good thing for your education. And mental block. So I don't know. I think Pei and Jacob, you guys were both part-time, right? So okay, so I was the full-time remote immersive. So it was like, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong. I think it was like 10 hours a day, 11 hours a day, or something like that. So like it can get really like they're long days, and it's like 6 days a week. I think Saturdays are a little bit shorter than the other days, but it can be. So, there's this feeling of imposter syndrome that pops up every now and then, when you're getting like fed all this information from a fire hose. There are times where you may doubt yourself, or things are moving along. You may feel things are moving along quickly where you wish you spent a little more time. But Codesmith is really there to kind of support you and make sure that, if there's any areas where you need a little more attention, they're very good at identifying those areas and helping get you up to speed. And so, yeah, Codesmith is really good at helping you get through a lot of those mental blocks that you may have. And like you'll hear a lot about imposter syndrome. People come from all different backgrounds, and a lot of people are making a big career switch. And and with that comes a lot of self-doubt. And let me be the first to tell you that you can do it. It's very possible. So many people have done it before. So if that imposter monster, as they call it, ever creeps up on any of you, this is a very good way of approaching how to learn how to code, and being able to learn and feel comfortable with where you're at when you get into the job, into the industry. So I hope I didn't miss any part of your question, but I'll pass it on.
Yeah, anything to add, Pei or Jacob?
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly shout out like that word mastery that you used, Dante, because that is something that I personally struggled with, was like feeling like I had to know everything perfectly. And this is especially in the junior portion where you're first getting that fire hose of information, especially. And I think what really helped actually was our instructor, Matt Severin. He was like, I was that guy who tried to learn everything and I'm burned out. And so you don't do that to yourself. And I was like, okay, well, he seems like he knows what he's talking about. So so I think honestly part of my journey in Codesmith was like learning how to relax, like being okay with not knowing everything. Because honestly, and there's no engineer that knows everything. Or else every team of devs would just be one person. And so I think that was definitely something that I took away from Codesmith. I was like, well, I mean, I might be a little stronger in this area, but then my cohort mate's a little stronger in that area, like kind of like what Tim was saying, we learn from each other and we help each other out. And that like really helped my mental well-being through those 9 months, because for the part-time program, it's much less of like a sprint and more of just like you're taking an extremely, extremely long walk. And so you have to have sort of the mental endurance to get through that, and not try to spend all your waking hours chasing down whatever you learned that day. Because like I said, we were also working full time. So we just, we don't have the capacity to be doing that to yourself. So I think that was something that I really got out of Codesmith, was like kind of like just to calm down and let it absorb. You might not feel like you get it right away, but it's now in your brain and it's going to sit there and your neurons are making those connections. Not to bring my biology background into this, but that's literally what's happening. So that's kind of what I felt like was a positive personal growth for me in Codesmith.
Yeah, I
Awesome.
think I can echo a lot of that, and I think what Codesmith did sort of for me psychologically was to like have a different relationship with this concept of mastery, sort of regardless of what you may be coming from. I believe that it is, like coding, computer science, all those things are worth attempting to master, but it's also making peace with the fact that you like maybe never will be at some ultimate realized state. It's always a pursuit. And so Codesmith made me very comfortable with that. And, even if I develop a solution very slowly, that I have the confidence to make those tiny steps forward, because, I can look at the other difficult things that I've done or learned and say, well, I didn't know that at all either at the time. And, so I can't imagine a day where I feel like I have mastered any of the, the technologies that I use or that we use. Like mastery, are you kidding me? But I, you know, I can be competent, you know, and I can find the next solution. I can, you know, perhaps, you know, just take that next step. And Codesmith gave me a lot of peace with that.
Love those responses and wonderful question, Dante. Thank you. Jen, what about you?
Hello, everyone. So a little bit about me. I've recently got accepted to the program for the New York on-site, and super excited, but also super nervous as well. I guess my question for you guys is kind of like a two-part. I want to get the most out of it, of course, and I guess like before I start the program, what is something that I can do to prepare other than like the pre-course and stuff? I don't know if there's anything that you guys would advise me to do to like be a little bit more prepared, or like yeah, get more prepared, I guess. And then my second question is, I know like the economy is a little bit harder and like getting software jobs are a little bit more difficult. Do you guys have any advice or things that you guys did in particular that like helped you guys get a job?
I mean, if you are admitted, like you are ready to take on the challenge, right? And part of it is taking on things that you haven't previewed, that you haven't, you know, tried to get ahead on, because that's like part of the learning journey is struggling with something new. And yeah, I don't know, maybe we need to do like a part 2 with the economy and job search piece. I just want to jump in on that one. Maybe the second round there.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say before, just enjoy your free time. But if you're like me and you watch like coding videos when you go to sleep, the hard parts are not, they're good. It's really good information and it will help you. But I wouldn't stress it at all. Seriously, like enjoy your time now, and yeah, because it's gonna be a sprint and it's not gonna stop. So catch your breath now.
All wonderful advice. Yes, I before I went to Codesmith, somebody told me, you know, just go ahead and say goodbye to your friends and family for 3 months, that you'll see them after that. And honestly, I was able to spend more time with them than I expected. But before the program, you know, to add my 2 cents, yes, spend time with friends and family. However, definitely finish the setup instructions for the pre-course. I just have to add that. That part's very important. And obviously, the more you do, the better in terms of the pre-course material. But don't worry about extra. Don't worry about extra. All right. Second half of that, the economy. I feel like that is good to touch on. Yeah.
Yeah, I think people putting in the chat sort of related questions. I think for me, like I said earlier, I felt like I was quite lucky in my search not being super long. But if I had to pull maybe like a common thread amongst myself and other people in my cohort who have managed to land positions, it's honestly, I would say about knowing how to make the most of your connections. And that is something that I think is very specific to this industry. You know, in education, like you send your application in and then they call you and then you go do a demo lesson and that's like it. It's very, you know, shake and bake. But there's a lot more about like personal connection in this industry in terms of getting your foot in the door. And so I think you just have to really lean into that. Like I would say learning to be personable is actually quite a skill in this industry. Knowing like kind of what Jacob was saying, empathy is not just important in the job, but it's important in getting the job. You know, like this hiring manager you're messaging on LinkedIn probably gets tens of those messages every single day. So you don't want to just be another one on the pile. You want to, you know, make it about, you know, their time, value their time, and make connections rather than, you know, being necessarily so blatant about it just being a job, because it will serve you even if you don't get that interview. It will definitely still be a worthy connection that you make in the future. And I think that's kind of, like I said, the common thread I've seen is people who have landed jobs, like they know how to make those connections.
Anything to add, Tim or Jacob? I know we're low on time.
I could say so much, but I know there's also other questions like this. It's loaded, and I would love to talk about it. You know, I would say like feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Be love to talk to you.
Will
All
do.
right. Great. Well, let's have Nakami and Alazar ask their 2 questions, and then we'll end it after that. So, Nakami, let's start with you.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. It's real quick and it kind of has to do with the last thing we were just talking about. I was just wondering like how much you feel like your background before Codesmith assisted you in your job search, like if at all. Yeah, I mean it was touched on already, but if there's any other details. Thanks.
The question was how much has your background helped you before Codesmith? Is that it?
Yeah, like how much do you feel like your working experience before Codesmith helped you on your job search and even in Codesmith?
Yeah, I mean, mine definitely helped. Because, the company that I'm currently working for, there's a lot of overlap in what my previous company was doing and what they're doing. So I was able to speak to it, not on like a technical level, like, not from like a coding perspective, but just like I understood their business a little bit better. So that aspect, really helped me. But there's a lot of web, companies out in the, in the market, and Codesmith does a really good job of teaching you the skills and giving you real world experience, that you're able to actually put on your resume as well, that can speak directly to these companies. And so, that's a big part of my resume, was like my OSP was a big part of my resume that came up a lot in my interview, in my round of interviews with Density. And they asked me a lot of questions, and basically everything that I'm doing now is everything that I did in Codesmith is what relates to what I'm doing now. Nothing from my previous job relates to what I'm doing now. As far as like coding and from a technical standpoint, but it did help me be able to speak to some like challenges that they have in the market. But yeah, from a technical standpoint, I'd say Codesmith will get your back there.
Yeah, and I'll just like super briefly echo what Pei said before. Coming from education, you kind of you learn how to be a whole human and interact with other humans, and so that is so invaluable in the job search and yeah, and in working with other people. So yeah, don't discount that experience.
Absolutely. Some of my favorite coworkers were waiting tables or bartenders or Uber drivers before Codesmith. And the number of success stories with those non-technical backgrounds is very large. So definitely don't let your background hold you back mentally, because you've got it. You've got it. So thank you so much, Tim and Jacob. And let's move on to Alazar's question.
Hi, thank you all for being here today. 2 quick questions. The first one, for the mid to senior level roles, did you find that as you were preparing to apply, you had to add on to your portfolio by maybe creating additional pieces? And the second part of the question, I know, Jared, you mentioned you had an offer while you were doing the fellowship. Do you think that it would have still been possible to land a job at a company, say like Amazon, had you not done the fellowship? I'm just curious as to how, it's listed like you need a certain amount of years of experience. Do they take the fellowship as a substitute for something like that? Thank you, guys.
Yeah. What was the first question again?
Did you have to add on to your portfolio that you had in Codesmith for the application process, essentially?
Yes. Pei, I saw you reacting. What's your answer there?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't. I like kind of like what Tim was saying, like Codesmith, the experience that you get there, it's enough to fill the resume. I mean, I had literally nothing else because I had just spent all my previous professional life teaching. And that was not, I couldn't find anything particularly relevant about that. I mean, Codesmith does go into like every single resident's personal background and sees if you can like pull out any sort of technical related thing. But for me, I was just like, you know what, it's not worth trying to massage it in that direction. So it was just my Codesmith experience. I did have my fellowship on there as well. But I'll maybe let Jared speak to that a little bit more to your second question. I really don't think it's necessary. I definitely know that there are residents that got, you know, FANG or mini FANG offers like right out of the gate without being a fellow.
Definitely, yes. No, and this was actually told to me before I became a fellow. So you have the opportunity to like ask the people who are fellows for you, you know, like, what's your experience like as a fellow? Is there anything you'd like to tell me before I apply? All this stuff. And I asked, man, I can't even remember the question, but I remember the answer was that one of the fellows said, definitely don't feel like you need fellowship to get a job, because that fellow was, you know, working as a fellow at Codesmith and watching all of their cohort mates getting jobs in industry. And absolutely, yeah. I mean, like one of my residents, I won't name her name because I didn't ask her, but she was definitely not a fellow, and she was a mom going through the program, did not have a technical background, got a job at Google, right? Like as a software engineer, right? I've had so many residents get jobs at Amazon. Most of them weren't fellows beforehand. You definitely don't need fellowship on your resume to get those high-end jobs. And I will just say, like, from my time teaching here for 2 years, it's quite rare for people to add extra projects to their resume after the program before getting their job. I mean, I'm sure some people do it, but people, like, if they're going to continue working on something, typically it's working on a project that they already started in the program. Jacob, Tim, anything to add to that?
I had, you know, some web development experience before. I'm sure that was helpful. It was years ago, right? So it was a talking point, but no, you know, Codesmith, and I think there's a question also in the chat that sort of speaks to this. I mean, you know, regardless of background, Codesmith at least gave me the, you know, the resume and the technologies that I could speak to intelligently and the skills that I could demonstrate those technologies. So no, did not need to add anything.
Amazing. Well, we are 5 minutes over. Thank you so much to the panelists for staying with us. And thank you so much for giving us all insights into your journeys, right? How you made it into roles, kind of things that you're working on now. I'm sure, I mean, this has definitely been beneficial for me. I was just telling Maxim beforehand, these are like my favorite workshops, or the ones where you get to hear from people working in industry and their stories. You all are definitely very inspiring. So.